it's very clear that DEIA is something that's very important to you. It's something that you care about or that you want to learn more about. I think we can all agree that there is, especially after that last research session that we got from Dr. Pieper, there's so much work to be done, and there's still so much improvement to be made in this space. And it's a lot of work, and it can be incredibly overwhelming sometimes. It could be emotionally draining sometimes, and sometimes we don't even know where to even start. And it can get difficult to continuously tap into that fire to keep us engaged and active and constantly vying for those changes personally and professionally. But that's what we're here to talk about today. The name of the panel is Break the Rules. The status quo no longer works. So what can you and your company do to stay continuously activated for social justice and civic engagement? And I just want to remind everybody that this will be an interactive panel. So we will have a discussion about 35 minutes or so at this point, and then we will go into breakout groups where we can actually have discussions around specific questions and aim to find solutions. And then we'll come back and do a really quick recap after that. And afterwards, after the summit is over, we'll go ahead and collect everybody's solutions and actually publish them for all to be able to see, so we can share that knowledge, and it'll also be available widely throughout the various industries that are represented here today. So with that said, I'd just love to really quickly introduce some of our all of our panelists, starting in alphabetical order. So we have Dipanjan Chatterjee that's here with us. Dipanjan is Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research, where he leads the brand experience and strategy practice. His areas of expertise include marketing, branding and growth strategy, customer experience, consumer insights, and fairness and equity. Next up, we have Ellen Doherty. Ellen is an Emmy award-winning producer and writer with more than 20 years experience in children's media. Ellen is currently Chief Creative Officer for Fred Rogers Productions, overseeing the creation of television and digital content for the company's PBS Kids series. Next up, we have Huai Scott. Huai is currently serving as Senior Vice President, Human Resources for NBC Universal, where she supports the Universal Filmed Entertainment Group and provides HR leadership to NBC Universal teams around the world. As an HR professional in the entertainment industry for over 25 years, she has played a key role in educating leaders in DEIA and allyship. And next up, we have Kenneth Mejia. Kenneth is a certified public accountant and auditor, currently running for Los Angeles City Controller. He co-founded a community service group called We Can Make a Difference LA that provided essential supplies to unhoused communities and low-income families, and advocates for tenants' rights through the LA Tenants Union. And lastly, welcome Shruti, so glad you were able to be spotlit. We have Shruti Ganguly. Shruti is an award-winning filmmaker, writer, published author, and owner of the production company Honto 88. She has produced several films that have premiered at Sundance, Venice, Tribeca, and Berlin, and directed videos for major brands like Google, Unilever, Nike, and Condé Nast. Shruti was a member of Obama's ECHO Committee, sits on the Creative Council for Emily's List, and also is a co-founder of the Resistance Revival Chorus. Welcome to all of our panelists. We're so glad to have you here. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us and sharing with us your insights later today. So with that said, we have a lot to talk about today and a very limited time. So let's just go ahead and jump into some of our questions. As I said earlier, we have so many unique perspectives and experiences in this panel. We have creatives, we have executives, activists, some kind of combination of those three and beyond. So we would love to just understand what is important to each of you and just kind of start from a very macro scale. So from your perspectives, what is the status quo that needs changing? What are some of the things that are simply not working for everyone and need to be addressed? I'll leave that floor open for anybody who wants to get started with that.
Thanks, Nabe. I can start. This is why I work for NBCU, and I think for our company, we need to most certainly increase representation. And we also are looking to create a fully inclusive company that's anti-racist. And part of that is bringing down systemic racism. And what we're looking to do really is to affect our local communities in the social equity and justice space. And one way that we're doing that is to work with system impacted people, a group of people that our society has been willing to marginalize, discard, warehouse. And really this group is akin to untouchables. And we don't agree with that. We don't accept it. And we are creating space for people of a different background to work with us, and for our employees to gain proximity to people with a different background so that we can sponsor each other, get close to each other, build compassion and empathy, and support this community in particular.
I mean, I can jump in, and thanks for that question as a jumping off point, Narbe. So, I mean, coming from the perspective of a filmmaker, and also who identifies as a woman, who's a person of color, like you can suddenly see why you're getting hired for things, because you're fitting within that like diversity box in a way. And but that being said, the thing that one still sees is like, that's why you're getting hired. It's not necessarily the work sometimes, or like, and you can see that based on the budgets that you're given, the trust and way in which your collaborations happen. And this is a sentiment I've heard from several filmmaker friends of mine, especially around like, Women's Day or something. It's like, we're all going to get hired, but are we getting the same budgets and having the same trust and resources as like, other folks in the industry, like, the straight white dude, are we being treated in the same way? We know why we're getting hired at times, but it's still like, we still have to do so much extra work still to and so I mean, it's kind of like a double-edged sword right now that we're seeing. I mean, one's not complaining that you're getting those opportunities at all, but you're still having to jump through so many hoops, do extra work constantly, and do a lot of explaining. So
I think for me at Fred Rogers Productions, in particular, because we create TV shows and media for young children, and yes, the company was started by Mr. Rogers, that Fred Rogers, and so our point of view really, also looks at the importance of what needs to be on screen, and that representation. So looking at the characters that we put on screen and the voices of the characters when it's animation, and the people who are making the media, all of that is super important, obviously. And I think another like incredibly broad social issue is just the lack of kindness and respect on all of these levels that everyone is talking about. And I feel like after 2 years of pandemic, a lot of people are just so stretched thin that those extra surface layers of courtesy are sometimes just not even available, because everybody is really trying to do what they can do. But the opportunity for me as a producer, as an executive at a media company, is about who do we put on screen. And my metric really, the way I put it in my head when I'm looking at new shows or looking at stories, is, does this need to exist? Is there a reason? There's lots of stuff that's out there that could exist, but does this need to exist? And we're a not-for-profit, I should say, also media company. And we're focused on mission, which is a gift.
Narbe, I can jump in if you like. And thank you for having me. And it's wonderful to be in such august company. So I have been working with brands and with companies for over 2 decades. If you rewind, the old status quo used to be that, companies really couldn't give a damn about any social issues, right? It was all about the market and commerce and transactions. Now that's changed, right? That's the old status quo. And I think there's been a change in collective conscience. There has been a change in the easy availability of information and how rapidly it disseminates. That's fundamentally changed how companies look at social issues, right? So we've made some advance there. But I think where we've gotten stuck today, the status quo today that I think we should endeavor to change, is that there is a lot of talk and not enough action, right? Mm-hmm. Most companies have responded to trigger events like George Floyd's murder by posting all sorts of communiques, right? They write letters to their employees, to their shareholders, to their customers. But you're not seeing commensurate action. Well, let me give you a few examples. In the wake of George Floyd's murder, $50 billion were committed to racial justice and equity programs, right? 50 billion with a B. There's analysis been done that says only 0.5% of that amount has actually been allocated towards those causes, right? Now, let's just say that, the calculation was wrong. They're off by a factor of 10. Where does that get you? To 5%, right? So there's a significant gap between what has been promised and what is being done. If you look at what the top 6 financial services companies in the United States are doing, they are actively fighting shareholder movements to shine more transparency into their racial equity practices, right? Now, that is at odds with what they are communicating at large, right? So I think we've managed to move companies to the point where there is acknowledgement, there's recognition, there is some sort of statement, but we still need to provide that additional nudge to action. Mm.
Excellent points. Kenneth, did you have any thoughts on this subject, or would you like us to keep going?
You can keep going. I think, well, what I have to chime in on is pretty much the same thing, but later on, so I'm good.
Fantastic. Sounds good. So these are all excellent points. Thank you so much for bringing these to light. And I think they set the foundation for a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about for the remainder of this panel too. So we addressed some of these issues. Now I'd love for us to talk a little bit about how we would break these rules, right? How would we address these changes? And what does that even look like? How do we do that work? And perhaps what are some really good examples that you can think of, or that you yourselves are doing too, that our audience can learn from too? I'll leave that open to anybody who wants to get started, but actually maybe we can frame it a little bit. Let's talk about some creative projects as well, right? Like how are we essentially changing the way things are done creatively in the entertainment, media, and tech space? And can you all speak to some of the examples of what you guys are doing too?
Sure, I can start. I think that, when you're telling stories, you're creating worlds, and every time, and you're creating characters and dialogue, and there's hundreds, thousands of choices that go into every half-hour episode of TV. Well, definitely thousands that go into every half-hour of TV. And I think part of the challenge is having a practice of how you make those decisions. Going back to that idea of action and how do we actually take action to make change. I think that sometimes people get distracted by the big choices. The big choices matter, but also there's those day-to-day choices that are really incredibly important. I started my career in live action TV production, working with real people, real humans. Now I work a lot in animation as well and with puppets. But in live action, I worked on a show called Reading Rainbow, which was for kids. And I had a mandate as an associate producer to, when I was casting people featured in documentary segments, featured in the background, just like as extras, if it was like a montage kind of thing, to reflect the world, to reflect the diversity of the people, to reflect the different cultures, different races, different abilities. But I found when I got to animation that that wasn't necessarily the case. And the first animated show I worked on didn't really always deal with human characters, but it did deal with male and female characters. And I found, just as a really micro example, that when if a script did not mention the gender of a character, it was male. It was male when it got to casting, or it was male when it got to design. And I was amazed that even if the team was not all men, this is the default. And so I was like, okay, well, this is something we need to do. In script, we say what that character is. Is that character male or female or non-binary? Although that was not the phrase in 2002 I would have used, but like, what is that? Who are we representing? What are those choices? Today, one of the shows that I executive produce is Alma's Way, which is created by Sonia Manzano, Maria on Sesame Street, as many will remember her. It premiered on PBS Kids last year. It's about Alma, who's a Puerto Rican girl from the Bronx. So it's real world, it's human characters, not animal characters. And we make hundreds of choices about that world, about the dialogue, about the stories, about the dynamics of those stories. And in particular, it's New York City, there's sidewalks. We need to fill the sidewalks with people. Who are the people that we're showing, even in the background? And the team puts in great care to have that same kind of diversity that I spoke about with real people, casting animated drawn characters to make sure there's a diversity of body type, of race, of culture, of everything. And that just takes that everyday practice of asking the question when you have to make a choice. What am I choosing to do? What am I choosing not to do? Who am I choosing to include? Who am I choosing to exclude? And I think that's what's true for me in media, but I imagine there are similar lessons in other industries as well.
I guess I could talk since I haven't talked. Hi, everyone. I'm Kenneth Mejia, CPA here, housing justice activist, he, him. You know, when we talk about breaking the rules, we really have to do it. It needs to be radical. Can't be the same old same. You know, I used to be an accountant for an auditor for Ernst & Young, Activision, just big, gigantic Fortune 500 companies. And you would just see a lot of money spent on racial justice training, like $30,000 for these consulting firms to teach about race. And then after that, you know, nothing changed. And I think on the city level too, because you know, I'm more of an activist in local politics. We're seeing the city of LA spend immaterial amounts of money on things that can actually affect Black and brown people's lives here in LA. You know, our city of LA spends close to 30% of our budget on the police. And, you know, when you look at all the police stops in our city, 80% are Black and brown people. And what you're noticing is that the most people who are suffering from poverty, who are suffering from incarceration, who are suffering from lack of resources, bad sidewalks, no tree trimmings, just terrible living conditions, are Black and brown people. And what we'll see, just like what we see in corporate America, but also on the city levels, we'll see the mayor or city council say, we're advocating money to provide legal defense for undocumented immigrants. And then when you look at the details as an accountant, you're like, oh, how much money did we put? $2 million. Oh, what's our budget? $11 billion. How much do we spend on the police? $3.1 billion. And I think that's essentially what we have to really tackle, is like, what are we doing to change or even break the rules that we talk about? You know, we hear this a lot on the media, or even we're going to paint the street Black Lives Matter LA in the Hollywood. That doesn't change anything. Like that's performative activism. And we could spend thousands of dollars, even a few $1 million, but nothing will change if we actually go for the root causes. One of the things that I always push for in corporate America when I work there is like, why do we always have to work with nonprofits? Why don't we actually work with affected organizations who are on the ground, who don't even know how to file status with nonprofits, who are actually doing the work, who are there fighting on the front lines, in front of police stations, in front of sheriff stations, actually trying to push for change so that their lives can be materially impacted. And so, I think that's what it really means to break the rules, of working with these impacted communities and maybe try to go outside of that framework of I know we love working with nonprofits and stuff, but actually working with these people on the ground who have 100 followers, you know what I mean, who have very little following, and they could really use that support. So thank you.
I can pick up that idea and run with it to some extent, in that, if you look at these big companies and try and understand how they play a role, a lot of them will write a check, right? And that's fine. I'm sure the recipients of the checks are eternally grateful for it, right? But let's face it, it's kind of lazy, right? Because, these companies are not short of cash by any means. It's pretty easy to write a check, right? That is almost like a Band-Aid on corporate guilt. What you really need to do is bring about sustained, enduring change. And the only way you can do that is if you take something you do really well, and then you use that to make a difference, right? In traditional business jargon, it's called core competency, right? Let me give you an example. If you look at all the work that Microsoft does in criminal justice reform, it's all connected to technology. And why is that? Because Microsoft knows technology. That's what they're good at, right? So they have a program with the Massachusetts Department of Correction, and they've created a virtual reality program, and it helps those who are incarcerated but in the process of transitioning out. Right? So they kind of get to sort of play in this virtual environment to understand what life is going to be like, right? And there are numerous examples like this where you say, look, as a company, let me take my core competence and let me make a difference in the world by utilizing what I do best.
I'd love to jump on that as well. Thank you so much. What we've done at NBCU is we solicit volunteers to do pro bono work, so they can leverage their talents and their skills that they already have to support nonprofits who don't have the budgets or trained staff that for-profit companies do. And one example is last year, we provided more than 500 hours of pro bono support worth $100,000 in key areas like HR, finance, marketing, and strategy. And we did that with a nonprofit, the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, to help their organization improve their efficiency and their effectiveness so they could focus on their core competencies. And just one example of the work is that our marketing team, which usually puts their work, establishing campaigns and pitching ideas to filmmakers. We had these employees work with the ARC, and we worked with them on branding and logos. And these skills that they normally would use to pitch to filmmakers, they worked with the ARC to create their pitch decks. And so we looked at their social media, we looked specifically at their YouTube page, and most excitingly, we're working with them to create a promotional spot to change their narrative around system impacted people. And that's going to be shown nationally. So our employees get to use their talents and their skills to do this meaningful work. And that also is driving employee engagement, because employees want to feel like the company is leveraging their unique abilities. They want to know that their work is meaningful and that they're contributing to something bigger than themselves. And so there's this pride as employees to be doing this work. And it really demonstrates our company's commitment to action, as opposed to writing a check or just mere words.
Excellent point. Does anybody else have anything to add to that?
I think Shruti's trying to, but she can't, she's not, she needs to be unmuted.
Yes, if the moderator could please unmute Shruti for us as well.
I don't know what type of sign you're giving me. No, I'm kidding.
no sign at all. Pure technical error. Please go ahead.
No, I mean, agreeing with so much that's already been shared, but one of the things that I would add from our perspective is like a mindfulness when it comes to who we're working with, and to be in a position of recognizing some of the kind of we like to partner with companies on the content side that also holistically we can see that this what they want to make with us actually fulfills something bigger in terms of their action plan, that like doing a series, whether it's around abortion or that we did with the Meteor, is also going to spark a necessary conversation. And we want to understand also as filmmakers how that content comes out and the strategy behind how they're going to market it, because then it helps us do a better job. So I think we're trying to pay attention to, the mission of certain companies and why they're working in a certain way, and how we, how that also aligns with our purpose as well, and to Ellen, to your point, like kind of leading from a place of like purpose and kindness. I know it can sound a little like hokey, but we'd rather be very aware of that, when it comes to who we're working with and how we work, and having like no tolerance for like any type of disrespectful or demeaning behavior. And also for us as a production company, it's like we're working now, we do stuff in animation, that's a new thing, and live action, doc, and then myself, I'm a screenwriter, I'm also a director and EP, so I think we all wear many hats, and find partners on projects that also are completely aligned with the way we work should also be the product, like in alignment with the ultimate thing we're putting out, whether it's a TV series, whether it's a piece of content, because understanding that like as filmmakers we have a responsibility, even from the beginning is pretty key. Like I started, I produced a series called 73 Questions for Vogue, which is like one of the biggest interview series on the internet. And if I think about like when we were starting that, if only like 3 of those questions were really specifically purpose driven, how amazing could that have been as a part of the format? They're understanding that people will really watch the things that we are making and it will change their lives, and that you should take all those actions into account.
I think a related thing that makes me think about is the size of jobs for partners, let me rephrase that. When we are pitching a TV show, like with Alma's Way, the first season of that series is 40 half hours, which is a huge amount of work, and it deeply impacts both the volume of work and the pretty intense production schedule that goes along with it. Has an impact on who we partner with, who we can hire, and adding time to try out new people, to take risks, to bring new people in, bring in new voices is definitely part of the process that we think about. But it's like the longer you stretch a schedule, the more expensive it becomes. And that, at 40 episodes, it's a lot. So one of the things that I think about when we are trying to parse the work that we, subcontract out like to vendors, and what I'm, looking at from, with different broadcasters or streaming services, what is the size of the job? Like if everything is at the scale of the huge job, like 40 half hours in a first season, like your first foray with a product, as it were, that limits who's going to be able to take on that work. And if you can change up and have a variety of sizes of projects, then more people can get experience, so that if you have people who have interest but no experience, they can't do the project that's this big. They're not going to get the gig. So having projects of different sizes allows people to grow their career, grow their work experience or their company's experience. And I think thinking about that both as, for when you're commissioning work, keeping that in mind is a way to, and parsing smaller projects for people to be able to, for you to get to know them, to grow their experience, and even to apply to those jobs can be an learning experience for a small company or an individual that is to be valued as well.
I love that. Thank you all so much for sharing all that. It's been so great to be able to hear how your companies and your organizations and your groups are helping to advocate these changes. I'd love to take a second because part of the description for this panel is how do we remain actively engaged in social justice and civic engagement. And that often has to happen at an individual level because we don't necessarily have as much control over some of the larger organizations that we might be a part of. So I'm curious to hear from your perspectives, what are some tips for how we can stay individually engaged and how you continue to keep that spark lit and burning bright, even through like some of the most emotional duress or some of the most challenging times that you might have faced in your careers too?
I can start. My advice would be find your people. So people who are passionate about your cause and who inspire you to keep doing the work. And I have an example, when my team was working with ARC, that after the insurrection happened last January, my team was really demoralized and we were processing what happened, and our colleague felt really frustrated. And he said, I didn't create this problem. Why is it my problem to solve? And Sam, who's the executive director, in all his wisdom said, the reason we fight for equality is that it benefits everyone. It benefits the people we agree with and the people that we disagree with. And if we can get this right, it benefits everyone, including the people who stormed the Capitol, because there will be no impulse for an insurrection. And if you haven't read it yet, there's a book called The Sum of Us. And in it, the author, Heather McGhee, busts the myth of the zero-sum game, meaning if I win, then you lose. And she articulates how equitable policies benefit us all. So Sam's words gave us hope and optimism to continue to fight for the kind of equitable and just world that we want, but we haven't seen yet. So my advice is find your people, right? And they keep you going. When the world feels unjust and unfair, like change isn't happening, you can also pass on the baton when you feel tired. And then they'll pass it back to you when they're tired.
I think I love the find your people message too. And I would also add those small tasks that you can take is looking at who your people are, what that circle is, how wide that circle is, how many circles you might have. Because for me, when I'm looking at hiring people or finding creatives to work with or others to work with, I feel my job is to know people and to know lots of people and to have a diversity of people that I know, and personally and professionally for that matter. But I think really one of those sort of at the level of daily practice or weekly practice is looking at who are you hanging out with, who are you professionally, in particular for this, who is it that you turn to when you need advice or when you need recommendations for somebody to do some work. And I have a lot of questions about LinkedIn and how LinkedIn has really worked and used, but it is a way to reach a lot of people. And I think connecting on there, and I use that to reach people who are not people that I immediately know, and to reach the people of people that I know, and really looking at who those circles, who's responding to your content if you're posting there, and looking okay, wait a minute, maybe I need to change this. Maybe there's something that I need to do, is something that is a personal action that doesn't require a committee to approve the choice to do. It's an action that an individual can take.
One of the things I would also just jump off is the people that you are surrounding yourself, as long, if there are people that you can really learn from. I think as a filmmaker, you should always kind of constantly be a student and a listener, not just showing up with your perspective and your lens. And I think the most effective storytelling is really leading from characters and real people and paying attention to an audience, and when it came to co-founding the Resistance Revival Chorus, that was with, dear friends who are organizers, and, they were involved with the Women's March and different other organizations that when it came to gathering people. And I can say as a filmmaker, even though the way we work and what we do has a social justice lens for sure, it was more about how can I learn from these collaborators of mine, these colleagues in a space where frankly, I know very little about, and admitting what you don't know is, I think, a really important thing to get comfortable with and push through. And especially in the space of social justice right now, we're constantly learning things. When you're having conversations saying like, you can't really use the word pipeline. Why is that an offensive term? Like your language, semantics, like you're gonna keep making adjustments and kind of allowing yourself to not be the expert, I think is pretty important.
Yeah, I mean, my advice for like staying active is find like what's bothering you about the status quo, and like others have said, see if there are people, whether it's not in your organization, but also outside of your organization too. I think it's very important, if we're talking about breaking the rules, to push buttons. And it's very hard to do that within our jobs and our organizations. You could still get fired if you post something about Black Lives Matter or about holding the police accountable. You could still get fired if you're discussing how much money you make with your colleagues. What we've done as a city controller candidate campaign is we've published every city employee's salary, every employee's how much they make, and we are breaking the rules because you need to know how to achieve equity, and what is equal is not always equitable. And I think that's what's really important. And I think back to workplace organizing, you could even get fired if you try to unionize or discuss with your group on actually trying to make things better for your company. And I think and if you can't find it within your company, reach out to mutual aid organizations or people who are on the ground actually trying to fight for systemic change, because it's hard to find it within corporate America. I'll tell you that, but there are a lot of people actually out there who are struggling on the ground, who can use your talents, your expertise. Like I'm a CPA and I do pro bono teaching people on how to file their tax returns so that they could get their missed stimulus checks, for example. So there's always something that you can do to help people in need. And so I encourage everyone to not give up and keep fighting for that better, place.
Yeah, I think you don't need to have an activist label to be an activist, right? So there's two sides to this coin. One is we are all consumers. Now, there's a lot of hullabaloo about consumers being social values driven in their brand choices and preferences. But for the most part, that data is overstated. If you actually look at purchase drivers, you will find that attributes like quality, reliability, value, price, and so on far outweigh any kind of social considerations in sort of the average person's choice of brand, right? This is not because they're evil. This sort of underlying factors, they don't have the information on brands. It's difficult to get the information. They're just trying to make their lives easy and so on and so forth, right? Mm. So as consumers, if we go that extra mile for ourselves and for everyone else as well, right? If we can bring more information to bear, if we can influence other people, right? There is a sort of a consumer activism role there. And then the other side of the coin, which I personally believe is even more influential in driving social change with companies, is the employee side, right? Or some relationship thereof, because the employment nature, that relationship is very different now than it used to be before, right? with the great resignation, the great reshuffle, call it what you will, with this talent crunch, acquiring and retaining employees it's a strategic imperative for companies. In some cases, it's tougher to get employees than it is to get customers, right? The difference between an employee and a consumer is that consumers, frankly, don't really care much about most brands, right? The bottle of cold brew that you picked up at the grocery store, that brand really doesn't say much about you the way that your place of work does, right? When you show up at a cocktail party, one of the first three questions you'll get asked is, what do you do and where do you work, right? Now, when you tell them where you work, do you feel proud about it, or do you sort of have a muffled answer that you don't really want to talk about where you go to work every day, right? Our identities are inextricably intertwined with our places of employment, but that gives us power as well, because if we want our employers to behave in a certain way, we as a collective can influence that, right? So in our sort of daily choices of where we work and how we work, we can make change too.
Amazing. Thank you all for your insights. I think we actually, I can't ask the next question because it's time for our breakout sessions. So thank you for this wonderful conversation. For everybody that's attending, if you can just hold on, our volunteers are going to be breaking us up into breakout rooms so that we can continue the conversation together in a smaller group setting. Like Allison said, like Nicole said in the very beginning, if you are an introvert, please feel free to utilize the chat to be able to contribute to the conversation. If you don't mind being on camera and speaking, please feel free to have your video on and unmute yourself. The two questions that we're going to be tackling will be, how can an individual impact the culture of their company? And how can companies create sustained long-term engagement from each of your points of view? So I guess with that, oh, there we go. There's the notice. Okay, we'll see you guys in 10 minutes or so after we're done with our breakout rooms, and we'll recap together.
Saturday are awesome.
Talking about if
Okay.
because went out there and looked at the signs too.
These are the things. Hold on one second. Hello. Hello. This is Miss Joyner's animation class. I don't know if anybody can hear. Hello, is anyone there?